I'll take you for a ride on the devil's ship. I'll take you for a ride where you sink or swim. Now come with me and let this story begin.
But Bruce, we made it.
We made it. I can't believe it. It's been, 2 years in the making.
Yeah, that's been a while.
Then a pandemic, and it looks like you're operating in a first-class operation here.
I'm lucky that you came now. If you came last year, you've been, what are you doing in the ghetto? But now at least.
No, it's all good. Well, first of all, this spot's fantastic. It's easy to get to, other than closing the little bridge over the 40. But thank you for the heads up on how to get here in the fastest way possible.
It's part of living in this city. I'm surprised I never asked you.
Yep.
How the hell did you get started in comedy? Was it because I've had people that have come on that have been agents or managers, and I get talking about their love of comedy that initially they were just captivated and like, I have to be part of this. What was it for you? How did you walk into it?
Well, there are two things. First off, I wanted to be I wasn't necessarily a comedy fanatic. I was a comedy fan, and I loved Kinnison, and I loved certain comics that we'd sit around and listen to. But I just wanted to be in the business. I wanted to be in the entertainment business, and probably more rock and roll at the time. I had hit up Donald K. Donald and try to get a gig there, and did my best to get some opportunity. But the first real show business opportunity I was offered was to drive one summer at Just for Laughs, to be the driver of the artist and industry. That was 1986.
Was this to pick them up from the airport or to bring them from venue to venue?
Everything.
Okay.
Yeah. And, I think the festival was pretty small at that time. It was French and English, but I just did the English artist. And I'd pick people at the airport, and I would, take them to venues, drop them off at the hotel, restaurants, etc. But what was great about that experience was that you had quality time with people. Some people wanted to be left alone. A lot of others did not. They wanted to know where to eat. They wanted to know a little bit about the festival, and you were their entry point to the festival. So they would ask you a lot of questions. And if you were smart, it was a really great way to build your Rolodex. I didn't expect that or know that, but it just became that. And, one of the first people I ever picked up was the gentleman's name. I'm going to forget his name, but he was the producer of Letterman.
Okay.
So, he would come and update me on what he thought of the restaurants I recommended. We became, friendly. And, all of a sudden, when I went to New York the first time after, working at the festival, I called him, because that was the day we could only call people. I think I got blown off by his assistant, and the minute, 15 minutes later, wherever I was staying, he rings and he goes, "Why didn't you give me notice? You want to come today?" So all of a sudden I realized, this is the perfect job to get into the business. The other person I drove, obviously, didn't become a friend of his, but Jerry Lewis. One of my first gigs was driving him, his manager's wife, and his dog.
His dog too. Okay.
Yeah. And Jerry was an interesting character. Wasn't the most friendly man, but it gave me a real insight to, that sort of celebrity from that era. That same year, I was driving Sandra Bernhard, and they had done The King of Comedy together, which was Sandra's breakout movie. It was the Scorsese-directed movie with De Niro.
Yeah.
And they had a horrible experience together, and Sandra thought he was an awful human being. And everyone connected to Jerry said that Sandra was an awful human being. And they would both hit me up with, Sandra would go, "How's that piece of shit today?" And then Jerry's manager's wife would go, "So how was Sandra treating you? Is she being disrespectful?"
Oh, this is amazing. I love how that works.
I got caught in the middle. So I had to play it carefully. I never sold either of them out. But if I had to support anyone, I would have supported Sandra, because I witnesses Jerry's ways at times, and I'm sure he went after her. And again, he was famous for saying women aren't funny and all these other horrible things that obviously I disagreed with him on. And so that was a very interesting experience. And then little by little, as I got to see comedy from this vantage point, fell in love with the art form. Again, in the late 80s, it was the beginning of a new era of comedy. When I entered, it was a nightclub business. 2 people could sell out an arena, not 200 probably today.
Yeah.
Handful of people were theater acts, but it's largely a nightclub business. At that point, there were no sitcom stars. at that present moment, there were none. It was before Cosby.
It was right before the boom?
It was right. Oh, it was right at the 2-3 years out.
Okay.
So we were first. We were the third year of the festival. The first 2 years were Francophone, French only. And then by year 3, 1986, there was actually 85 was the first year in English. I didn't work that year. Second year in English, I started to work at JFL. And in 1988, so 3 years later, largely, I think, because I was just one of the only guys that spoke English, Andy Nallman, who had given me my opportunity at the festival, said, do you want to be a director of programming? You seem to have a good eye for comedy, and you're sort of first in line. So he said, you want to go scouting across America? Because Andy got bored with it very quickly. He didn't like being in these hotels, and he found it a bit boring, and I did it for a couple decades. So in 1988, the first trip, I got on a plane and flew to Boston, which was one of the hotbeds in the world of comedy at that point. I saw Dennis Leary smoking cigarettes with no material. The first year I got in there, 2 years later, he was, killing. And, a couple years later than that, he was a superstar. Boston.
So you got to see that whole little evolution of a lot of comics.
Dennis was always charming, and he had bits and pieces of material, but it was clear that if he could get the material, he would, he would be something to, he could become a star. But what was interesting about that era in Boston was that it basically was white boys from Boston, tough, and they did not like people coming into their territory. They didn't like acts coming into the market. They were all making a fortune. And then when the boom came, there was, the club that was big downtown would have 3 suburb clubs that were 500 seats, and they would do 8 shows a week. Everyone, Boston, the top level Boston comics were making more money than most touring acts. And they didn't like if you came to their party. And they were pretty rough with the other comics if they did. So I found that very interesting. It was pretty one-dimensional, point of view. It's the Boston point of view, male point of view. And then little by little, you'd see a couple people pop up like Wendy Liebman. And, actually, one of the first people I ever saw after that first showcase was Panette when he was on the way up. But that was a fascinating time to witness stand-up in Boston. There was a documentary that covered the subject. I think When Stand-Up Stood Out or something like that. It was we did the premiere at the festival and brought all the Boston guys in for that. But you should, if you can find it, I think if you Googled Boston stand-up scene, When Stand-Up Stood Out, I think that's the title.
There's a whole documentary about it.
Oh, yeah, it's fascinating. It centers on Stephen Wright, who had done the festival a number of times. By, I think, 87 was his first appearance. This was a time where you go on The Tonight Show and you have a set, a killer set, and you can go from club act to theater act in one television appearance, which obviously does not happen anymore. I mean, There's lots of ways to become a arena act that didn't exist then, but there was no TV show. There is no TV show today that, quite honestly, has any impact, but let alone that level of impact. So Stephen went from Boston guy to, major star.
Wow.
Yeah, one appearance. Johnny Carson asked him over to the couch.
And that was it.
Game on.
So this was crazy to me, is that you literally started, you're the classic story. You started from the bottom of an industry. You started from driving people around. Right now, by the way, I gotta say something about you. It surprises me that you're not a dick.
Well, when I play ball hockey, I think what I hear is
that's different though. I allow that. That's because
okay. Well,
I myself am a piece of garbage. But it's so weird that normally you hear stories of people, they get to a certain position and they become assholes. And you know this, people have probably told you the same thing. It's very weird that everyone, well, I mean, there's a reason why everyone likes you, but you could be an asshole to everyone, and you never are. You've been super nice to me for years. You've been nice to people around me. When I hear stories about you, it's like, oh yeah, Bruce is a good guy, which is crazy because anyone else in your position.
Well, that's very nice, but I don't think there's any excuse, first of all, to be.
I think it has to do with the fact that you started from the bottom. You met everyone. You saw the hard work that's in it, because you don't act the way I would assume you would. Knowing you the past couple of years, I don't know. It's very surprising in a good way. I like it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
It's the least I can do to contribute to the world, not make it any more complicated.
And then okay, so you're doing this now. You're getting to see all these different acts. You see people evolve. You're falling, I'm assuming, more and more in love with comedy.
Yep.
When do you start saying, all right, I got to start bringing guys that I really, really like that need to be showcased, need to be seen?
Well, look, I think that, to give people their due, listen, especially even when I was out there scouting, Andy Nallman was the guy in charge. And it was really his vision at that point. Of course, there was Gilbert Rozon in the background, but Andy led the English portion. And Andy had a vision, and Andy wanted to see us make noise and not be boring. And at times that would be by booking controversial comedians. It could be something silly like the Tokyo Shock Boys, or I think that's what they were called.
Did he ask for that? He said, go edgy?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. First of all, we have to deliver for our TV broadcasters, and we had some big U.S. deals very quickly. Which I can speak to because they also changed the game for us. But Andy also wanted headlines for crazy things on stage. He wanted variety acts that did insane things. He wanted people to get upset. He wanted comedy to push some buttons and not be a boring event. And that always impacted me. We look through the lens now the same way. We're a much more mature organization with, bigger concerns at times, but there's always an eye to me to never lose sight of the controversy, to make sure there's a conversation going, that comics are challenging on stage, to make sure we have an open canvas for people to be themselves, to express themselves, and to make sure we're not boring. Really, quite honestly, Andy hated boring, and that never left me.
That's good direction to give you. Don't be boring. Give me something good.
No, absolutely. He would look and say, he's okay. He's in a suit. He's got the same old opinion that everyone else, his wife, or, this or that. He says, look, what do we call them? Comics in a suit. We only need 3 of those for the festival. Go find me people with something new to say, something that will surprise people. And that led us to find some of the great voices and point of views in comedy and history. From the Brits. I mean, we went all over the world. We were looking at Britain, Australia, all over America, Canada, of course. Canada's our priority. Looking for those comics we know that people would stand in the back of the room. We wanted to find those comics that would blow people away and offer something different. That's why when we found Hicks, we said, oh my God, we got a guy that's going to blow the room apart plus challenge people. Perfect.
Who found Hicks?
Andy saw Hicks at a Catch a Rising Star, if I'm not mistaken, in New York, if I remember correctly. I forget how they connected, but that was absolutely a booking that Andy made in the late or early 90s. I think it was the first time he came to the festival. He did the Nasty Show. He did a couple of other things. And then we were producing a one-person show series. We did one-person show, not the 50 we do today.
Okay.
We'd pick one, and we were very, very, very rigid about the standards of what we wanted, and we wanted the artist to put on a production that wasn't just standing in front of a brick wall. We wanted to have a bit of a narrative we wanted a title that was cool. We wanted to find artists that weren't always pure stand-ups, and we started off largely with more theater one-person shows.
Okay.
But after Hicks had killed at the festival, I was begged by his manager to stay in LA one extra day to go out to somewhere in the suburbs of LA. Might even be halfway to San Diego. I forget where I was, but saying he was headlining on a Monday night, that I should go see, would I stay one extra day and go see Hicks? And, I really didn't want to book, or Andy and I didn't want to book a stand-up for that spot. We were still looking because we had so much stand-up. Why don't we find something a little different? But I loved Bill, so I decided to go. I think the guy's name was Jack Mondros or something like that was his manager's name. So he just sort of drove me crazy. / I had a feeling that I shouldn't miss this. I go off to see Bill in this suburban comedy club, not a full room, and halfway through his set, the sound system breaks because he was just, and he goes ahead with his set without it and still kills. And it was one of the best 60 minutes I'd ever seen in stand-up. And I called Andy and I said, look, it's not on many levels what we were looking for, but I said, it's just the best thing I've seen. I think we should book the best thing we've seen and not necessarily have to hit all these. He goes 100%. And he came to the festival, and that hour, 75 minutes, was captured by Channel 4, British broadcaster, and recently voted in the top 10 stand-up specials of all time in Rolling Stone. Right up there with Pryor.
And that would have never happened had you not stayed that day and then put your foot down.
Yep. And what happened with Bill, too, was that Bill was not fully grasped by American comedy fans. He wasn't a star because he'd have to go across the country and get into red states, and his point of view would be a disaster. People would walk out, the entire room would walk out, and he wouldn't compromise. He would say, basically, fuck off if you don't want to listen to what I have to say. And there was really no compromise for Bill. He had an approach, and he had to deliver that approach. That's who he was. He wasn't going to adjust his material for some audience in Kentucky. A lot of times he had a hard time selling tickets to the level that he should have. He wasn't getting massive TV offers. So he goes off, this Channel 4 show airs. Channel 4 was sort of the hip network in England. There was a BBC, ITV, and Channel 4, and Channel 4 was the younger network. And we were there. We were the longest standing stand-up series in British television on Channel 4 at the time. And Bill exploded. So Bill went from club act in North America to arena act in the UK, and then an arena act in Australia. Let's start again. Not an arena act, a theater act.
In the UK.
In the UK. Same thing in Australia. And all of a sudden, Bill Hicks fans were showing up, which was such a pleasure for him. A similar thing that happened in Montreal. The room was filled with people that loved him. And he went, oh my God, I'm not in a club where people are showing up for comedy, not for Bill. And it just was, the biggest, boost for him, because he could talk to like-minded people. And instead of having to fight off hecklers, they were, on the cusp. They were standing and screaming and shouting and supporting his point of view.
Did he ever talk to you about how he felt you changed everything? How that one decision?
We never really talked about.
Because it's interesting when you could pinpoint something.
It's not really about what I did. It's what
it's what he did, obviously.
What he did, and all he needed was a platform. And to be quite honest, people say, you booked Hicks and you booked Chappelle early on. Anyone would have had half a clue and a bit of taste would have booked both.
You say that.
So, yeah. There's, and there's others that I could say maybe I need a bit more credit for because I saw something at the bottom of it all, but they were clear cut. It was obvious that Hicks was a monster and perfect for Montreal. And, there's no question when you watch a VHS at 11 o'clock at night on a Tuesday of Dave Chappelle doing 3 separate sets in his teens from 3 shitty TV shows and 3 amazing different sets that were provocative or hilarious, were super intelligent. His performance was superb. I just called the phone number on the VHS to a guy I didn't know and just said, I never book someone on the spot. It was so obvious. I was just so curious to understand who this kid was. He was just so incredible.
I love these moments, the fact that you could pinpoint that moment of you watching the VHS and then calling. That's why I like what you said about Hicks. I like when we could pinpoint a moment.
Yeah.
Because I always see it in my head like a movie. I'm thinking of you in the VHS, like, who is this? There should be a movie one day about this stuff.
Well, I did Barry Katz's podcast.
He did mine. I like Barry.
Yeah, it's absolutely. And we talked about that tape. And I thought Barry was going to be this nerdy sort of accountant-looking guy, and who shows up the first year at the festival? This goofball that's 6'4" with long hair.
He's a character. Barry Katz is an actual character, yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, you are not what I expected. But anyway, so, luckily for us, and unfortunately for us with the case of Bill, we've had, we would have hoped to have had a long, long history supporting Bill Hicks. And more maybe in time, just like it happens with Dave now, it's more Dave supports JFL. Maybe we would have done the same with Bill, that he'd come back selling out the Bell Center. I think, if Bill had happened now-ish, he would be massive. Look, Marin perfect example, Mark Maron, he showed up at our festival. He did a one-man show. It was one of the best one-man shows we ever did. He sold 50 tickets a show. He couldn't sell a ticket, but he was superb. What happened is, through his podcast, obviously, he spoke to a like-minded fan. There was always value to Mark, what Mark had to offer. It was just difficult for him to connect it to some consistent group of fans. Podcast did that.
Yeah, well, he put himself. Each of those episodes, especially the early ones, was a lot of him. More so than the interviews, was just him coming out and you understanding him.
100%. So think about Hicks. I mean, even maybe Hicks would have popped sooner than he did because there would have been another outlet for him. I'm positive Bill might not have just wanted to get massive. Maybe he just would love to be himself and live in a nice little bubble of, selling out theaters comfortably and not doing any show he doesn't want to do. Or he could have been massive. I don't think it would have been anything but great. I just think that he would have just become a real major star worldwide.
And did you ever think of deviating? Did you ever, while you're doing this, because like I said, it was from the bottom and then growing into the company, did you ever think, all right, at some point I'm going to reach my limit with this, maybe do something outside of comedy?
100%. But what was interesting about it is that every time I thought about leaving, it might have been an argument with someone about the direction or, I want more money or something. Something happened at JFL that showed me that I could do something different every year. I was given so much room to build an event. If I had a viable project, a festival to pitch in Abu Dhabi, no one stopped me. Someone said, if I said, hey, I want to make this type of TV show, I want to do this or whether to do that. If it made sense, it was on brand, I could do it. So just about every time I went into a new year, as much as things are challenging at times, there was always something new we were doing. If it was a scripted series I was producing, if it was a festival in Sydney, Australia, if it was a festival in Chicago, if it was really trying to jump into the theater business by doing off-Broadway, obviously in New York, if it was, launching a new TV business, getting online, I just thought, why would I leave when I can and I've been offered the variety of I've been offered so many opportunities. It's really upon myself to go out and get them.
So is that always you that would think to maybe go on to a new platform, a new medium?
No. It was the team.
Okay.
It was myself from time to time. But, listen, it was our past owner. It was Andy. It was my colleagues or people that work for me. I had for a long time a guy by the name of Robbie Praw, who was basically... He left as our VP of programming, but he started off in running programming, director of programming, and he had a lot of influence on me because he was always wanting to shake it up and take shots and relaunch our Toronto Festival. He was the one with my other colleague Christine Melka-Ross that basically put the Chicago Festival together. And now I have an awesome team. Our festivals are run by a woman by the name of Robin Kaiser. She's got a great eye, and and they're telling me we shouldn't be doing this, we should be doing that. Like the most important part of my job now is not to get in the way, but to help someone, not go the wrong direction. So I don't want to get in the way, but I also don't want to, go down a path that's a bad idea for us, or most importantly, a distracting path because we've got so much on our plate. The key is the balance of just getting out of the way, letting people do their jobs, not being overbearing, because that kills progress and that kills the work environment. I know what it's like to be overmanaged, micromanaged. It's not fun. It doesn't feel, you don't feel secure in your job because you feel that every minute you're being scrutinized. I'm not going to retain employees that way and definitely not going to grow. If I told Robbie Praw to not have pushed us in these certain directions, like he said, blow this show up, blow that show up, stop that show. He wanted to aggressively attack where we were weak. And luckily for me, I saw the light that he was right. Most of the time he was right. Things that he thought sucked. So get rid of him, show me a better way to go. And not everything he did was right. He made mistakes.
As we all do.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah.
I like. I've met him a couple times. Robbie Prague.
Oh, he's a complete jerk.
No. Well, actually, you know what's funny?
No, I'm teasing.
No,
you.
he's a great guy.
One of my very good friends, but we talk every week and couldn't be prouder of him, but we do tease the absolute crap out of each other.
Oh, he's doing great. He's over at Netflix, if he's still there. But I remember we were doing a live podcast 2018, I think. Yeah, 2018 with Mike. And I was in the elevator and we were trying to keep Swartzen awake because I was tired. And you could sense that I was stressed out. I was like, oh, fuck, man. I have to manage all these people. And then he just looked at me in the elevator and I was like, hey, don't fuck this up. Like, but it was, you could tell like the way he said it and it just calmed me down. I started laughing. I was like, all right, yeah, you're right. How am I going to fuck this up? Let's just go. And then the podcast was fun. It was a great time. But like in that moment, he could have just either been like, oh, you should stress. But he was like, hey, don't fuck this up. And he said such a funny way. And I was like, all right, he's in on the gag. Swardsen's going to be fine. And then turned out it was one of the best episodes that we had done.
Oh, yeah, really?
Yeah, it was fun. Because it was him, Bob Kelly, me, and Mike.
Okay.
And we teased Poseidon was on the sideline and everybody kept teasing him. It was just a good episode.
Very nice.
Yeah. Oh, it's part of the...
Did he spill the coffee?
Yeah, it's him who spilled the coffee. Part of 2 drink minimum is bullying Poseidon.
Okay.
It's
All right.
me and Mike aggressively motivating him to do better. That's what it mostly is. Now, moving forward, so because you mentioned VHS tapes. It's interesting. You've seen a lot of different comedy eras go by.
Yeah.
We are, even without the pandemic, everything's moving digital. Plus the pandemic, and you don't know when things are really going to go back to normal. Have you guys sat down and said, okay, we need a strategy to tackle this?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, there's some new great people that came in with this new era, now owned by the folks at ICM in LA and Howie and Bell and the CH group. They've really upped the seniority of the staff. We've got a great team. Both on the JFL side and both overall corporately. So there's a team attacking the online space where we're out everywhere to get the brand out there, to monetize, to bring exposure to comedians. So every day, the gentleman that I now work for, Charles DeCarry, is pushing us to find better ways to build the event, to build the brand, to bring in money to pay the bills so we can continue to do the great things we want to do. So every day we wake up trying to be on top of anything that's out there that could be great for the brand.
So it's going to be a lot of, I'm assuming, remote stuff this year, probably.
Yeah, so what it will be this year, it will be a hybrid event. We will do as many live shows in Montreal that we are allowed to, and we assume, and we built a plan based on up to 250 people. So we will do a number of those shows. We also assume that we won't get Canadians and Americans living in America back because we're not going to be able to pay someone enough money to quarantine for 14 days. So the economics of what we can offer them are not worth their trouble. So we will work with the great comics that live in this nation and the ones that we've been making TV shows since the border has been closed. We've shot a series with John Doerr with comics. We shot one with Rick Mercer. We just shot Roast Battle Canada a little while ago. And
we need more Dave Merhesh. We need more of him.
Yeah, exactly. We got a lot of them. And, we had, so we'll focus on Canadian comics in Montreal up to 250. If it gets better, great. If it gets worse, we'll go more online.
Yeah.
We're shooting shows in LA and New York to go online. We're going to do new faces in LA and Montreal.
That's exciting.
Go online. The industry is buying passes in record numbers to watch that. So we started scouting a week ago in Austin, Texas, and our scouts are going all over America and Canada to see those comics. We're going to put a first-class group of new faces in front of the industry because we want to get back to as close to normal as we can, and that means we got to be online. That means we have to be adaptable, and that means that we will go where we can safely put an audience in front of comics.
So because you made me think of something when you brought up the Montreal comics and the scene. So I'm going to ask you a question that people ask me and I don't know what to answer. Yeah. And now that I'm involved in the French scene, I do notice the difference. Just they kind of have a pathway on the French side of how they can become professional comedians. Whereas I always get the same question from English comics here. And sometimes I ask it myself, I don't even know how I made it this far. What would be their, Just for Laughs is here. People assume it's easier for acts over there. Just for Laughs is their home. They have opportunities. But a lot of the Montreal acts always feel like they get shortchanged. Mm-hmm. And mostly because there's no direct way. We don't really have a film industry here in English for them to write, whereas Toronto, there's other options. Is there anything that you're thinking of, let's say just for laughs, like to open some doors for Montreal comics, or have you noticed that in your time that it seems a little harder for them, especially on the English side here?
Well, look, I mean, first of all, it's hard to make a living for comics in Montreal in English because you can't walk down the street and do an episode of Mr. D or whatever. So there's just a lot less things happening. Luckily, you've got one very good comedy club that, from what I can tell, books it well, pays reasonably well, puts people in front of a good audience. I'm sad that the Comedy Works that is still not around because that was a legendary room with lots of great history. But still, in terms of us doing more, I'm sure we could, and I guess what I would say to...
But what would it be?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think the first piece that we're always welcome to hear any advice on or any critical feedback is, I think it's the communication piece, because we're doing the best we can with what we believe could be helpful to comics and address an audience and address the industry to just put forward the best proposition possible. And of course, we want as many Montreal comics in there. And we showcase locally and we give people an opportunity to be seen. Maybe there are things we could do better. Maybe we're leaving some people feeling that they don't have a chance to be seen. So I would say more than ever, communicate with us. Tell us what we could do better. Tell us if you've got a great idea to expose Montreal comics. Pitch Zoe Rabinet, who is extraordinarily good at her job and conscientious of giving Canadians, let alone Montrealers, opportunities. Don't assume we're going to think of every great idea. Don't assume we're naturally restricting Montreal comics, because we're not.
I know you're a big Montreal guy.
Yeah, but at the same time, communicate with us. Feel free to say, hey, I got a great idea, or hey, I don't feel this is fair. You're only looking at people at this club and that club, and I don't work there, so I'm not being seen. Tell us. Communicate with us. That's the only way.
I never thought about that. I like that, by the way.
So just communicate, because especially given the job that I had for years, where I was trying to figure out. I worked on the Montreal show for years. That was created largely to give Montreal comics a chance to be seen in front of the industry and in front of Montreal comedy fans, because comics felt they didn't have the exposure. So that show was put in the rotation. What's the next great idea? We'll think about it, but if someone has it, tell us.
I like that.
Yeah,
that's the one thing you never hear is tell us. It's always you hear, we're dealing with it. We're doing what we got to do.
Yeah, but you know what? It's also, too, a lot of people get frustrated and pissed off and don't communicate, and we don't even know what they're upset over till we see a tweet saying, oh, this person's that, or they're not doing this. Well, first of all, if you want to put it on social media, your call, but just tell us.
Yeah, or through email, I think would be better, right? Than just bitching about it.
Yeah, but it's okay. There's sometimes we see a tweet of something, we go, oh, I never even thought about that. Shit, we got to fix that.
You know who I can never get enough of? David Pride. I can't get enough of Pride.
David Pride.
Him, I feel like you could put him on all the time. He makes everyone happy.
He's a funny man.
So we went through a couple of the years now. You met and I want to say discovered a lot of the greats that we respect and love now. Where were you 10 years ago? 10 years ago, were you thinking, all right, this is going to get bigger. We're going to go to Australia. We're going to expand. Or were you still in the phase of, all right, let's just see what we can do in Montreal, maybe Canada? Like, when did the expansion idea start?
Well, listen, the expansion piece has been there forever, but I think we finally sort of focused on it in the last, 20 to 15 years. The past owner was extraordinarily passionate about expansion. It's just not easy, okay? It's not easy to launch a comedy festival. It's, when you start a comedy festival, I'll give you a perfect example. Let's just say, hey, I want to produce a comedy festival in Portland, Oregon, and you want to build it from scratch, okay? Well, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to look at the amount of theaters you can fill, clubs. You're going to do a budget based on the ticketing. And then you're going to say, what other revenue streams can I have? Well, can I sell sponsorships? Yeah, but it's not easy. Can I do a media deal? Well, maybe, if there's a really original idea. Can I sell? Can I get grants from the government? Probably not in the States. And before you know it, there's a pretty tough P&L. It's not right away. You're going to look at that and go, why would you bother?
Yeah.
It's a bad business. So what you've got to be is you've got to be creative. You've got to create like what the team did in Toronto, a pass-based system that figured out the economics from day one. Sure, we needed some grants and some sponsorships, but the idea was so original that, and the way that the team designed it was they figured out what they could sell. They felt how many passes they think they could sell if the idea was good, and then they made the event for that amount of money. Because often we run off, even our first time in Toronto where we failed, we had a couple good years and then we sort of blew our brains out.
Oh, was it?
The first time, we just did Just for Laughs Toronto.
Okay.
Is that we sort of built it and then tried to figure out how to pay for it.
Okay.
So this time was re-engineered. And it was smaller. And it was built to spec. It was a comedy fans festival. If you didn't know Todd Barry or, at that time, John Mulaney, who was not a superstar, but phenomenal comic, if you didn't know who they were, you're not a client of ours. Okay? So we said, why do we can't afford massive marketing. We can't buy the Toronto Star. So let's just program an event for the fans that they're waiting for this type of event to appear because they're going to buy a pass. So we looked at how many passes we could sell, and we built, and that's what we spent. And before you know it, we had this very, very targeted festival that became very, and still is, very successful. I think you'll see us broadening it, but we will never lose the 42 piece and never lose the sort of indie piece that we've established well. We might go broader, but not taking away from not taking away from the fans that built our festival. So back to, it ain't easy to build a festival that makes financial sense. So most of the time, a lot of things have to fall into place for that to work. We're successful, knocking on wood here, in Sydney, Australia.
Yeah.
Why? We have the best promoter in the country as a partner.
Okay.
We're at the Sydney Opera House. Everyone wants to perform there at least once. We have the longest running TV series in Australia as the backbone of our event.
The Gags?
No, we have Just for Laughs Australia. It's the longest running stand-up series in Australia.
Really?
Yeah. It's been going now, I think we're going into our 8th or 9th season. We just got a new commitment for this year. We're doing the festival in December. And, we've had a bit of sponsorship, at times a little bit of government. So we found other sources of revenue, but all those pieces fell into place and created a P&L that made some sense. And by the way, we're working on 2 or 3 festivals in different parts of the world that are looking really interesting.
Are any of those parts New York? I've always been so surprised that there's no, I'm biased a bit, but I've always been so surprised that there's no New York version of the festival.
Our festival or a festival?
Your festival.
Yeah.
There's a New York Comedy Festival.
The New York Comedy Festival does a very nice job. We're not in the business to walking in and competing. And
is that why? Because they already have one? Okay.
Well, they're also our friends. And 2, they're Caroline's and is a part of comedy, history in New York. The city's hard because, very hard to get attention. One of the prerequisites for success is either a focus on your audience, like what we do in Toronto, because the first time we were too broad. We didn't get attention because we tried to serve everyone. You either service a very clear-cut audience or you go to a city that you can take over. Okay. You can take Montreal over. You can't take over New York City. So you would just be, you would just be something going on that comedy fans in New York would be interested in, and maybe some tourists. But you're going to compete with Broadway, the Knicks, the Nets, the Rangers, the Yankees, the Mets.
Even the Devils. People are going to go across the pond.
So I think it's too difficult. But if the perfect opportunity fell in our lap, sure. But we're very selective. So it's not just, can I make money? I mean, obviously we have to make enough money to make it worthwhile for everyone. But it's also, what does it mean to the brand? Is this a part of the world we want to focus? Is this a part of the world where the local comedy scene will be a great complement? When we're in Sydney, Australia, we're a platform for all the artists in Australia and New Zealand. And there's phenomenal comics. There's a Melbourne festival that's superb. We do a different thing. Largely what Sydney does, it brings stars from England and America for the first time to our festival. So it's where we put up Burr, Sarah Silverman, you name it, all came through this event. So there's a very exclusive piece. We're only 5 days. We're not 3 weeks like Melbourne. So we're sort of like a premium star-driven festival. And the things we do with the Australians is we give them TV exposure across the country, and we offer the Australians a chance to host our shows.
Help their careers grow.
Yeah, and you know what? Also, it's a give and take because, Dave Hughes, fantastic comic and a great friend of the festival, is a massive star in Australia. He hosts the gala. I'm sure he could make more money for that night doing something else. But he also wants to come to Montreal and be treated with respect in Montreal. So we make sure we reciprocate. And he's a nice addition to our festival. So it's no big give. It's just, it's understanding what those Australian acts want in our other festivals. Because, once you get in the family and you want to seek out other opportunities and you're extremely helpful to us, establish ourselves in Australia, we're going to reciprocate and invite you to our other events. Especially if you're great for, comedy fans of Montreal want to see you, because there's so many phenomenal Australian acts.
And phenomenal comedy fans here. Nerds.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Well, look, Bruce, I want to keep you for 10 hours. However, I made a promise to have you out in time for tennis.
Yes.
So I'm not going to keep you, but it was a privilege. I'm very happy to have you here. I want you to come back some other time. Maybe after the festival, we discuss how it went.
Sure, I'd love it.
Good luck this summer. I think everything's going to go fine. I think it's going to be fun.
I hope so too.
With these remote endeavors. And again, thank you for this conversation.
Listen, thank you, and I can't be more impressed with this setup. And not only that, I got Gentili coffee.
Yeah.
Even if I started with half a cup of coffee.
Got one and a half.
I got some little pizzas. This spot looks just awesome. This is first class. You even met me and gave me partial valet services.
You see that? Yeah, nobody else does that. No podcast does that.
No, not at all. So I thanks, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Bruce.
Welcome everybody to the thoughts in my head. All my confessions are the latest trend. I'll post them on my